So, Dr. Nancy, the conversation that I would like to have today has to do with change and transitions and just all the emotions that come with it, along with a sense of identity. And I know you have written a number of books such as Overwhelmed, Retire Smart, Retire Happy, and so forth. And so, my first question is, with all these books that you've written, what prompted you to do so?
Well, it was many, many years ago. My husband, we were living in Washington. I was working at Howard University. I had a great job. I was uh, uh, newly graduated, and I was assistant director of the counseling center. And my husband got this fantastic opportunity. Do you remember Walter Reuther's? Reuther,
Yep.
was- yeah, he he was invited to be the general counsel of the UAW and work with Walter. And as he said to me, your job is great at Howard, but there are many universities. There is one Walter Reuther, so we have to go to Detroit. So kicking and screaming, I went to Detroit. Turned out it was absolutely great for me. Got a job at Wayne State, met the most fantastic people like Walter, felt that we were part of making a change in this society. But I wanted to come back to Washington. And when Steve was general counsel of the UAW, they decided to move the offices back to Washington. So we came back to Washington, and I was so excited. This was a transition I wanted. And I got back, and I was really I was very upset. I couldn't get my act together. And I thought, here I have this transition, this move that I've wanted. I don't understand why I'm feeling so mixed up. So I had a friend who was the head of was a researcher at Wayne State University. I said, I don't understand what's going on. This is something I wanted. Moved back to Washington. My best friend from college lived in Washington. I actually got a fabulous job as the first woman executive uh, of the American Council on Education. I mean, it couldn't have been better. Why was I upset? So she sat down. We were in her living room, and she said, let's make a laundry list of all of the things that are going on. She said, they're really variables, but we'll call them a laundry list. That was my first thing, realizing here was something I wanted and I was still upset. So I had to understand it. I started with this laundry list. Eventually, I'm at the University of Maryland, and they're wonderful people in the measurement department. And they helped me formulate, you know, to try to tease out all the factors that made a difference. And that's how it started from my own transition, which was a good transition, but it still upset me.
I understand. So when you have changes like that, you were saying you got a good job and then your husband had to move to Michigan. How does that change, whether it's for you or anybody else, affect a person's mental health? Because when people hear the words change and transition, it can be scary for them. So what comes to your mind?
Well, change can be scary or it can be a growth producing situation. So much depend, you know, so much depends on your approach to change. And I've spent my life since then writing and thinking about change. And what my goal is to help people take the mystery, not the misery. I can't take the misery away, but we can take the mystery out of change. We can understand it so we can see what part of it is upsetting us. And we can not get over the misery, but be more on top of it. There was a book I read, I think the title of the name was Widow, not by a researcher, by a journalist. And she was talking about how upset she was with her widowhood and all that she was going through. Then she ended the book saying, now it's 2 years later, and if I had known then what I know now, I wouldn't have done some of the crazy things I did. So I think that if we have a cognitive map about what we're going through, we might still be miserable, but we can handle it more effectively.
I see. And when you talk about cognitive map, is it just how you approach a change? Is it a strategy of sorts?
Well, listen, I've written a lot of books, including a textbook. I can tell you, you could read the textbook, which would be boring, and 300 pages and something, or I can tell it to you in 5 minutes.
Okay.
I mean, it is so simple. There are three parts to this whole framework. First, you have to look at the change that you're going through. Is it something you define as a positive or a negative? Because that's where we start. And then we have to look at the degree to which the change is a big change. Let's say you're promoted to head up a department. So that's a change. But that's not as big a change as if you were recruited in another city and another state. So first you look at the change, the degree to which, how you assess it. Do you see it as positive or negative? Then you need to look at how large is this change, one that's a little change, your office has been changed, or a big change. And a big change is when it changes your role in life, your relationships, your assumptions about the world, and your routines. If something changes your routines, I mean, a Wall Street Journal wrote a column once about how they changed her office and how upset she was. That was still, she was still working for the Wall Street Journal. She was still a journalist, but one small change had upset her. So you look at the change, and is it changing everything? Your role in life, your relationships, your routines, assumptions, or it's a smaller change. That's number one. Then you look at where you are in the change process. I interviewed men whose job, they all happened to be men, jobs were eliminated at NASA Space Flight Center. I interviewed them the day they were, or the week they were told their jobs were eliminated, and they were devastated. I followed each one of them up 6 months later, and most of them were happy as larks. So you can say, why were they happy? And I'll get to that in a minute. But in the meantime, you can't make a judgment about yourself or anybody else at one point in time because it's where you are. If you've just heard that your job has been eliminated and I interview you then, that's going to be different than if I interview you 6 months later. And I often use this when I make speeches. I say, you won't believe this, but I was jilted when I was 30. And the day of the big jilt, I thought my life was over. Now, 60 or 70 years later, thank God he jilted me. What if I had married him? He was such a loser. I didn't even know it then. So it's the degree to which something changes your life, where you are at the just hearing about the change or 30 years later, where you are, and what your supports are, what I call the 4S system. And the most important, there's several important things. First of all, yourself. Are you an optimist or pessimist? Do you catastrophize or not? Then what kind of supports do you have? And personal supports. But I'll tell you, more and more, I'm getting convinced that institutional supports are critical. Critical. Um, the reason the NASA people who were devastated when they heard about it, and they heard just after Thanksgiving, right before Christmas, how are they going to get their wives Christmas presents? They were wondering. How are they going to tell their wives they had no income? So yourself, are you an optimist or a pessimist? Your supports, personal and institutional. Why NASA worked, everybody whose job was eliminated, that person was connected with somebody in the HR department who stayed with them until they got their job, another job, even after they had left NASA. That institutional support is what for them made the difference. So yourself, your supports, both personal and institutional, so support your coping strategies. Something's happened to you. Ask yourself 3 questions. Can I change it? If I can't change it, I've been fired. I can't change it. Can I change the way I look at it? Yes. I could see it as an opportunity because who knows next? Maybe this was a bad set. Maybe I have a chance to expand. So can I change it? If not, can I change the way I see it? And whether or not, whichever of those 2 I choose, how can I learn to de-escalate my stress? What strategies do I have for stress reduction? So those are kind of the 4 S's: yourself, your supports, your coping strategies. I think I've said enough for a while.
Okay. To build on that previous question, for many people, their sense of identity was wrapped up to a great degree in their job. So maybe they worked in the private sector, or maybe they worked in government, as you mentioned, people at NASA who lost their jobs. So could you
Right.
talk a little bit to that about how
Sure.
the people move forward if so much of their identity is wrapped up in their job?
Well, let me give you an example, and it's an example very close to me.
Okay.
I have a partner,
Hmm.
and we live together, and I know him pretty well. And he just, sailing was his passion, and he was the dock master of a marina. And he made a decision at 91 to give that up, that it was time. And so I thought he was going to have a terrible time. His whole identity for years has been with sailing and teaching people how to sail and managing boats. And so it's been a piece of cake. And I really find that amazing. And then, of course, I interviewed him. Poor guy. Can you imagine living with somebody who's constantly interviewing you?
Hmm.
And it was that he had a backup identity.
Uh-huh.
He moved from sailing. He'd always been an artist, but not a professional artist. And he moved right into his studio and started producing artwork, started showing it a little bit. He had an alternative identity. Many of us do not, but it's a good lesson that it's important. And I said, well, how come this is such an easy transition for you? He said, first of all, I've always been so curious and excited about looking at new things. But secondly, because art is my other identity. So I think if I had life to start again, I would try, I would encourage myself and others. My identity has been so tied with my writing, with my academic life. I mean, I'm still functional, but I would be better off if I had had a second alternative identity. And that's a new thought for me, and one to start encouraging younger people it, the old statement, don't put all your eggs in one basket. And I think that's really the essence of it. And so that's can make it much easier for you as you transition from one thing to another. And retirement, for those people who have been closely identified with their work, it's particularly difficult. So that's why a backup identity, finding another source of pleasure, can make a difference.
See, especially for the retirees or people who retired very suddenly and maybe they weren't expecting to retire, because I know that where I used to work, a lot of us were suddenly retired and it came as a bit of a shock.
Exactly. Now, what I've discovered over the years is that a bottom line issue for everyone, and in particular for retirees, is whether you feel you still matter. And I started working on the concept of matter. In fact, because Morris Rosenberg, who first wrote about it, was a colleague of mine at Maryland, and he looked. I looked with him. I looked at adult learners and retention. If they didn't feel they mattered to the university, to the professor, they'd drop out. If they felt they mattered, they'd hang in there. Morris was working on homeless, but whether, and the degree to which they feel they matter. So mattering has been an important issue. How can we help people in retirement continue to feel they matter? What can we do to help them? And I talk about a mattering recipe, but it's really a question of figuring out another way, another place to feel you matter. And I never would have expected for myself what would make the difference for me once I gave up writing books and teaching, is that I become very involved with, and it was accidental that I started with somebody else, a group, a discussion group, which we call the Aging Rebels. And it's connected to the Senior Friendship Center in Sarasota. And my co-leader and I have been doing this since well before the pandemic, 10 years or so. And we meet every week. And the people who are part of the group can come or not come. They don't have to sign in. They just come, drop out, return, and we pick a topic every week. I'll pick something like identity or mattering or whatever, and we discuss it. And this has been going on for, as I say, well over 10 years. It makes me feel I matter, but everybody in the group seems to feel that way. So that's been a wonderful thing, and was sort of it was an accident that it happened, and this is a key. I got a call from Erin McLeod, who is the CEO of the Senior Friendship Center, asking me if I would meet with Mike, this retired lawyer, and talk about doing something at the Senior Friendship Center. And I met with him, and we just started meeting, and there were about 3 women who met with us, and it started small, and somehow we called it the Aging Rebels, and it became quite an institution. So you have to respond to invitation. If I had said to Erin, and at that time I was busier, I'm too busy, I can't do it, call me in a year, I would never have had this opportunity. So you have to take advantage of opportunities. Mm-hmm. You have to get involved, and you have to be open to doing things you didn't even expect you would be interested in doing. So it was very accidental that it happened, but luckily I grabbed onto it, and it's been a very sustaining thing for me.
Oh, good. Excellent. So, for some people, the anniversary of a major event, like a job change, job loss, for example, will trigger a very strong emotion. Why does that
Right.
anniversary do so?
That's very nostalgic. It reminds you, for example, of what you had, and it depends on what you have now. Let's suppose you remember your anniversary or the day something positive happened. And if today your life is pretty dreadful, let's say you have nothing in it, the nostalgia is going to make you feel worse. I told you about my partner. I had the most wonderful husband in the world, 50-year marriage. I'm nostalgic in a positive way because my life is still full today. If I had nothing in my life, I had no aging rebels, I had no partner, I had kids who I didn't with whom I didn't get along. If all those factors, nostalgia would make me feel horrible, horrible that I look what I had and look what I don't. However, if your life isn't the same as it was, but there's things in it that are positive, you can look back and feel romantic and nostalgic. It all depends where you are now and how, but it's not just where you are, it's how you're defining where you are. It's so that's why I can say to you, thank God I was jilted. The reason I can say, thank heavens I was jilted, two factors. He really, what I followed him till he died, because professionally I knew about his work. He wouldn't have been right for me to begin with. So I was lucky, and lucky because I found the right person for me. That led to something better. You close one door and others open. So um, nostalgia can be depressing or can be just make you feel so happy for what you had, especially if you have something going on now.
I see. And so, for the people who are going through these transitions, if they say, well, how do personal relationships change? What do you say to them?
Well, explain, say another sentence to me.
So, with transitions, how do personal relationships shift or pivot?
But but, but, but they do. I mean, there's, but I'm not getting a handle you're looking for how to help people deal with relationships as they change.
Well, when you have a transition, say, for example, your job changes or you retire, how could you expect, how would you expect our relationship to shift or change in your interactions with the people that you
Um,
once dealt with?
well, I remember at a workshop, a woman raised her hand and said, "I'm retired, and now my daughter expects me to babysit, and I don't want to be a babysitter. And I love my grandchild, I love my daughter, but she has an expectation for me, and I don't want to do it. And yet I feel guilty that I should do it." So uh, it's you have to be a good negotiator. You have to know how to set boundaries, and you have to know how to negotiate in a way that doesn't put your daughter down because she wants you to babysit, but you set the boundary. That isn't what you retired to do. And it's complicated. If, there's no easy answer, there's no simple answer that there's no change that you move from one. apartment building to another in the same city. It's not a big change, but it's still your routines are changed. There's a lot of disorganization before you reorganize. So even if it's a little change, it's going to be stressful, a little bit unnerving. But you know, I have a mantra: today is not forever.
That was in your book, Overwhelmed.
And I live by that. I mean, that is so true. Today is not forever. Now, that's good and bad. If your life is good, it means it might not be forever. And if it's bad, it's not forever. But I find myself, if something is bothering me, I say that, I really actually say that to myself. I use that mantra. And for me, it works.
That's a very good mantra to live by.
Tell me something. Can I ask you about you?
Yes, I worked in government for a number of years. I retired last year, and I do teach exercise on the side. In fact, I received a certification for eccentrics, which is a program that I teach, and I'm also learning Tai Chi.
Wonderful. So you're helping people relax, really, meditate, um, move more easily. That's wonderful.
Thank you.
Because not only does it help you, it helps the other people so much.
Yes,
Yeah,
it does, and they really
yeah,
do get a good benefit, from these movements.
yeah. That's great.
Thank
Because I can tell you, my body isn't flexible the way it used to be. I mean, so it's very important to keep your body moving, uh, so that as you age, you don't stiffen up.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Dr. Nancy, is there anything else that you would like to add?
Well, I just feel missionary about the fact that all the one thing we all have in common. I don't care what your social class is. I don't care what your race is. I don't care ethnicity. There's one thing we all have in common. We are going to be dealing with transitions all through our life. And as longevity is there, people are living longer. So you don't just have one retirement, you might have three retirements. You don't have one marriage, you might have three marriages. You don't, it's constant, the whole business of dealing with transitions. And if my work can be at all helpful to people, at, in the very least, to help them deal with their transitions, that makes me very happy.
Excellent. Dr. Nancy, I appreciate the time you spent with me this morning. This has been very informative, and again, I really appreciate it. So thank you, and I hope you have a wonderful day.
And thank you for asking me to talk. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye
Bye.
bye. Bye bye.